do have news as we welcome you back. Deebo didn't practice today. Now, that can mean a multitude of things. It doesn't necessarily mean that he's not going to play. He is 50-50 right now, but I can tell you as a guy that went to South Carolina, going back to South Carolina, Deebo Samuel is always hurt, and it's just something you have to account for. And when a player like Deebo is always hurt, you're going to have some data. So he is huge. Remember, Fezzik, professional sports bettor, talked about it. He said, the status of Deebo is going to change how people approach this bet. And Dustin, let's just kind of start with the overview on what you found in doing your research with and without Deebo there in the 49ers.
Yeah, you mentioned it. Deebo's always hurt. So I knew there would be a large sample size to look at how this team performs with or without him starting. I went through just games he didn't start, not games he got knocked out of, not games where he had a low snap count, just games where he didn't suit up at all, because that lets us know what the game plan was going to be without him. They knew that they were prepping for him not to be there that day. How did they approach this? So going back to 2019, he missed one game. 2020, he missed 9. 2021, he missed 1. 2024, 4. And he missed 2 this year. So that's 17 games without Deebo Samuel in the lineup for the 49ers. So went through them straight up, how they covered, and how they scored. I will note, before we get into how it impacts the spread, they still score points without Deebo Samuel in the lineup. 11-6 to the over without Deebo in the lineup for San Francisco in their games when he doesn't suit up. However, when it comes to the side, things get a lot more interesting. 17 games without Deebo Samuel straight up, they are 8-9. Last 6 games without Deebo, they've performed better, 4-2. But here's where it impacts bettors: the ATS numbers. 6-11 ATS overall when Deebo doesn't suit up. That includes 0-3 against the spread over the last 3 games without Deebo in the lineup. That's the impact this guy makes for the Niners.
Okay, question on the totals. So do you have the averages as far as points scored with and without Deebo? So without the 17 and then the with. Do we happen to have averages? If not, it's completely cool.
I don't. I could do it in a break, though.
Okay, let's do that, because the ATS doesn't matter to me as much. I want to know what they're doing offensively, if that makes sense, because like you said, they are still scoring, so they're going to the over, but that doesn't necessarily in context tell us, I also, and I can dig into this as well, Dustin, I want to know the Purdy effects. Like, is he overly reliant? We know that he's comfortable, Dustin, Amal, we know he's comfortable with Ayuk, obviously Kittle, but just the comfort level and attempts towards Deebo. I want to go there too, but that's good information. So, again, kind of struggled the last few without Deebo Samuel, and he's going to be a big component here, Amal.
There's no question about it. What he's able to do for them offensively, not just in the passing game, but in the running game, he ascends Brandon Ayuk. He makes Christian McCaffrey even better than he already is. Just having that second guy behind McCaffrey. And then, of course, George Kittle, which we haven't even talked about much. Kittle, he's a guy that's been tremendous throughout his career for this team, really a key component for Purdy in certain situations. So it's going to be interesting. But, guys, I know you're going to disagree with what I'm about to say here. I don't think he's going to be healthy enough to have an impact based on the shoulder injury, 1 week turnaround. My thing is, if I were San Francisco, and I know they'll get criticized if they were to say this publicly, I would sit Deebo Samuel, and I would roll the dice and see if I can beat the Detroit Lions without him. And I would want him healthy to face either Kansas City or Baltimore. I know that's a little bit of a kind of outlier there, but I think to beat one of those teams, you're going to need a healthy Deebo Samuel.
Look, you've got Christian McCaffrey. Forget about Ayuk. If you have Christian McCaffrey and you have George Kittle, you should be able to beat 28 teams in this league. Just get in a couple of sieves with that offensive line. Potentially, I mean, he's not the best, but one of the top 5 left tackles of all time. Let's be clear about what the 49ers are rolling out there. Like, this is a tremendous football team, and that shouldn't be an issue. Their advantage should come on the defensive side of the ball, and like I whispered in the first segment, big guy, they've struggled defensively.
Yeah, so I did punch some numbers in just now. Overall averages for San Francisco the last 3 years. Obviously, it includes some of these games where Deebo has missed, but it gives you a general idea of how this offense has performed. Well, this year they averaged 28.88 points per game in 2023. They averaged 26.47 in 22. Without Deebo in the lineup, according to my data that I had there, they averaged 24 points per game. So we're talking 4 points off, more than 4 points off the average from this year's squad.
Yeah, he's a difference maker. Look, you're not going to – when we're talking about somebody that impacts in a position that impacts the number, you always start with the quarterback. For example, for years it's now been Aaron Rodgers, 6.5 points. He's going to have that type of impact on a number. It's not what novice – like general bettors don't understand that a wide receiver, even a running back, often they're not going to really move the number. But Deebo is going to affect this number a point and a half, Amal.
There's no question about it. And I think, as you said, you laid it out perfectly. Who could you guys think of from an overall perspective that impacts a number that's non-quarterback? I don't think there's too many guys more than two on this team, CMC and Deebo Samuel. You look around the rest of the league, I mean, if there's anybody you take off of Baltimore, nobody's going to affect the number. Maybe Travis Kelce on the Chiefs, obviously.
If Tyreek Hill was out in Miami, he'd have a point and a half, 2-point impact on the number. But your point is well taken. And by the way, just as an aside, Christian McCaffrey, a lovely player. And again, he had 17 carries from 98 against Green Bay, and he had 30 in the air. Aaron Jones was the best running back in that game.
He was outstanding.
Aaron Jones was the best runner. Like McCaffrey, I think I need more. He was great. It feels like this. I don't know. He was great at the beginning of the year. That's just kind of an aside. We can look at his prop numbers here in a bit as well.
But would you guys think that Green Bay made a concerted effort, and they did a great job, minus the 39-yard run. I talked about it earlier. 16 carries for 59 yards. They really negated what McCaffrey was doing, whereas Jones was tremendous on the ground. I thought the thing that beat Green Bay was their play calling in the red zone on first and second down.
That's it. That's it.
They ended up kicking up field goals. I thought defensively they said, hey, guys, if we're going to get beat, Purdy's going to beat us, and that's fine. We'll live with the result.
Yeah, there was. I thought McVay was 20-20. I thought he was. Excuse me, I said McVay. LaFleur. It all comes from the tree. I thought from the 20s he was the better play caller, and then he freaked out when he got inside the 20s. That's really what happened.
Yeah. And I think Green Bay did a great job of poking holes through everything that San Francisco wants to do on offense and defense. Which is why I have concerns for the Lions this week, because I think once those were exposed, now the 49ers went back to work and said, well, how did they beat us? Now the Lions are going to have to find other holes to poke this week, because I think Green Bay did a great job with their game plan to say, this is what San Francisco's done, and this is what we're going to take away today.
Green Bay scored 21 in the divisional round. I believe their number as far as team total closed 17.5, so they went over it. You guys want to take a stab at where Detroit is team total? So the Detroit Lions team total coming up this Sunday.
I'm going to say 21.5.
Let's go with, well, it's a high total, 51. I'll say 23.
These games are tough with Amal and Dustin because they don't like to be wrong. Congratulations, Amal Shah, 21.5. So 21.5. And again, I'm just throwing the number at you guys because we have to then start. I often look at the team totals to divide it, and then I take a look at the combined total, which is obviously 51. That's generally the way it goes. But sometimes I like to attack it team-wise. 28.5 is freaking lofty for the 49ers, but don't be shocked if they get there.
Yeah, but, the thing is with Dan Campbell's propensity to take certain risk on fourth down, this game could be interesting from a San Francisco perspective because you might be put in tougher spots. You might also wind up with some advantages if they fail in certain situations because we've seen throughout the course of the season, nobody's willing to be a bigger risk taker than Dan Campbell.
John Middlekauff joins us, former NFL scout, at John Middlekauff on Twitter. A good follow. You can check out the podcast Volume Network. Haberman and Middlekauff, that one specifically covers the Bay Area and then General Football 3 and Out podcasts. And we say hi to John. Hi, John. Good to talk to you again. And we'll start here. I loved at John Middlekauff on Twitter where you were, I guess you could say you were critical about Kyle's handling of that game against Green Bay. Why?
Well, once your quarterback's struggling to throw the ball, hey, thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
I just think that you have, one of the best, most versatile running backs we've ever seen. And clearly he was the best running back in the league this season. And he's proven to be one of the best players in the league when he's healthy. And Kyle's proven to ride McCaffrey. And then they get in this game, and I understand he is very he gets very set to his game plan because a lot of times it works seamlessly, right? It's why they're in their fourth NFC championship game in 5 or 6 years. and he's had all the success he's had without having, quote unquote star quarterbacks. But that was a classic example for, especially he's a run guy, that he just kept forcing the pass with a quarterback that just can't grip it when it rains. Like, we have enough evidence now. It happened in Cleveland. It's happened in this game. It was a disaster. And this is not week 5, right? This was, you're a 10-point favorite at home against the defense. The guy just got fired today. So, and it had nothing to do with that game. Like, he was going to get fired regardless after the season in Green Bay. I just thought Kyle was very stubborn. And I think sometimes he gets like that with his game plans because they work a lot. And in his mind, he's like the Albert Einstein of football. And listen, I understand why he is cocky and has the ego in his ability to scheme throughout the week. But sometimes you got to adjust on the fly. It's really what made Belichick the greatest coach of all time, is he was so indifferent to plays and play style and just do whatever it took to win that game. And sometimes Kyle just can get stubborn that way.
John, kind of staying on that theme, what do you make of the fact now this is the second time in a big spot? He's gotten very conservative with the offense in terms of what they're going to do near the end of the half. We saw it in the Super Bowl against the Chiefs this past Saturday. They had plenty of time. The way they were running the clock down late, you would have thought they were positioning themselves for a game-winning field goal.
Yeah, to me, you either trust your quarterback or you don't. You can't, nitpick and pick and choose different times when you do and you don't. Right, so like the Lions, say what you want. Like, they trust Jared Goff, and they're ultimately going to win or lose by putting it on his shoulders to pass in big situations. They've done it all season long. And Kyle, his words, and for a lot of times his actions, like, I really trust Purdy. And then you get into a situation where, like you said, like you prove that you don't trust him. So you can't tell me you do when your actions just show me you don't. Because I've seen you do that with Jimmy Garoppolo, right, who clearly you didn't trust. So I think that's now, is it simply Purdy in the rain they're not going to trust, and they trust him every other time? We'll see, because it's not supposed to rain, I guess, right, this Sunday, and then obviously in the Super Bowl it would be in a dome. But that is just something that – and sometimes when the game's not going well, Kyle gets like that. Like, he doesn't just have this gunslinger mentality, and I think sometimes it gets to his quarterback. He kind of ebbs and flows how that guy is playing.
John Middlekauff joining us, former NFL scout. Got a couple of great podcasts, Volume Network, of course, at John Middlekauff on Twitter. Okay, betting, so I'm just going to throw the numbers at you, and you tell me what you think. The 49ers are 7-point favorites, John, and the total is 51.
I think we're going to overreact a little bit to last week with the Niners. Right, they clearly came out flat in the rain, impacted their quarterback immensely, and they lost Deebo Samuel, who, at least this week, we know, that they can prepare for him not being around. So I think a lot of people, and I'm sure you guys are talking, like, everyone's going to take the Lions. And I actually could see the Niners coming out and playing really well. I'm just a little hesitant. Like, I'm kind of spooked after last week. And the one thing with the Lions, like, they could – last week was a little easier than the previous week, but it's not like they've just been dominating their opponent. So I like the over. I mean, the Niners' run defense has been anemic. I mean, it's really been bad. I think their defense is a little overrated right now. Like, clearly the two NFC defenses are way worse than the two AFC defenses. And I just think a lot of points, if it's not raining, are going to be scored in this game because the Lions can't cover me or you. The 49ers, besides Charvarius Ward, are really struggling to cover people. I mean, Ambry Thomas is getting cooked. And their defensive line, which I think when we say the 49ers over the last half decade, all these good teams, you think, defensive line. Well, yeah, Nick Bosa's good. But what about everybody else? And they're not good. They're actually closer to the Lions in the sense of, like, they have Aiden Hutchinson, and then they got a bunch of other random guys and some good linebackers. So, I think a decent amount of points are going to be scored in this game. Two great offensive coordinators.
John, we already know the defensive issues with the Lions. They've given up 676 yards passing in the two games in the postseason. But you brought up a great point, which is this defensive front for San Francisco. Will they be able to get pressure on Goff based on the way this Lions offensive line is played without bringing a backer or anything else like that? Because you said it. Even Nick Bosa was missing in action last weekend.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's hard. I mean, they had an issue in the middle of the season, if you remember, against the Vikings on that Monday Night Football game. Wilkes, who, Kyle kind of likes being conservative on defense and just letting his defensive line hunt. But Wilkes is kind of the opposite. He likes blitzing more. And then they lost that game against the Vikings because, remember, they blitzed right before halftime, and they gave up a big touchdown. And then they had a bye week, and then he moved from the booth down. So, they've kind of neutered his ability to just do what he wants to do. Obviously, Greenlaw and Fred Warner are good blitzing linebackers because of their athleticism and physicality. But one thing when he was with the Rams, Goff, now the Rams' offensive line beside Whitworth, especially over like 19 and 20 and 18, was not as deep and solid as this Lions offensive line. But they got pressure on Goff, and he kind of melted and folded. And that's obviously the key to them dominating Sean McVay all those years. Well, if you watch Jared Goff, he's not getting hit as much now. How are the 49ers, if Nick Bosa doesn't turn into the Nick Bosa that got $125 million guaranteed, how are they going to get on him? So if they can't get on him, I think we got a real game. If they're hitting Goff, I think they could cover the 7 points pretty easily.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.